Okay. So let's look at a few key sort of issues that may occur in the workplace. There are a lot, and I'm not going to go into every single one of them, or in fact even in that order. Particularly aspects of loneliness and isolation is very apparent, both in the workplace, at school, pretty much everywhere in life. There is a disproportionate amount of loneliness and isolation. Also, mental health disorders, which may or may not be caused by that said loneliness and isolation. We can have a lot of sort of a lack of social-based progression, particularly in the workplace. Sometimes there is a very heavy aspect of sort of workplace politics, which sort of influence people to make decisions about moving people up. I'm not saying that any of you do that. I'm just saying that it's just kind of part of the workplace from my perspective, or it has occurred. Not sort of necessarily basing all of your decisions on sort of merit or someone's ability to do the job well. Sometimes there is a little bit of that sort of trusting another person because you know them very well and such. Sometimes we can struggle navigating that and sort of progressing through the workplace. This brings me to this example of an autistic architect who produced this like amazing building. But after they produced the building, because nobody was sort of promoting them, sort of getting them in contact, they weren't going to networking or anything like that, they just kind of fell off the map, even though they produced this like amazing sort of architecture. Burnout and fatigue, another aspect of that. There are a lot of things to being autistic that can make life particularly, maybe not tiresome is the right word, anxiety provoking. The social aspects, the sensory aspects, over time we can get into these states of burnout, which do look similarly to having a mental health dip. Comes with all sorts of different aspects. Of course, I'm not going to go into it too much. Communicational differences can also impact this. If you have somebody who is communicating a lot with indirect communication, body language, sort of reading the room, that kind of aspect of communication, it can be quite difficult for us to understand what's going on. We might need a bit more clarity. We might not have the sort of self-advocacy enough to ask for that clarity sometimes. Also expectations that people have on us and how we work. Aspects of masking, as I was saying before, about hiding one's autism. And self-advocacy, because if you hide your autism both to yourself and to other people, you don't particularly advocate for your autistic needs in that circumstance. So it's a very key part there. The expectations element, you know, perhaps maybe I'll go into it. For example, autistic people tend to have like very spiky profiles. So we tend to be very, very good in some areas, but not so good in other areas. And it can be quite hard to transfer the skills that we learn in one area to another. It can take a bit longer than usual. So for example, myself, when it comes to communication, talking about autism, doing that kind of stuff, I'm pretty good at it, but like again, like when it comes to organization, comms, communication, I'm just awful. So I need support in that. And some people find it hard to believe to a certain extent. There's kind of this expectation that I'm going to be good at everything, so I'm good in one area, which is not true. The sensory and social differences, of course, you can imagine. The workplace is quite sensory provoking. It's going to be a lot more triggering on the long term or even in the short term to autistic people or people who have sensory differences. And of course, executive function, like I was talking about before, which is related to that kind of planning, organization aspect of how our brains work, can be sometimes quite difficult. Some people, especially when starting a job, can struggle with travel. So actually getting to work, that can be a really, really big stressor for some people. So if you have someone who's joining your workforce who is autistic, might be worth asking, you know, if they want a lift or like for the first couple of weeks or so. It could be helpful for some people. It was definitely helpful for me. You can narrow the task list. So generally what works for me is anything above 3 sort of sections of work to do a day tends to be quite overloading for me because I like to focus in on one thing and very intensely. So generally like 1 to 3 tasks. It doesn't mean like 1 to 3 small tasks. It could be 1 massive task that spans the entire day, or it could be 2 that half the day, etc. But generally, if we can split our workload like that, it tends to be a lot easier for us, or for me particularly. It could be different for other people. Don't expect easy and fast transitions from one thing to another. Usually humans, when we switch from one thing to another, we have a transition time between stopping what we're doing and then starting something else. For autistic people, due to the monotropic brain, that transition time can be longer. So generally, like what I would do if I was having meetings is I would try to have at least like 15-30 minutes between meetings to allow myself to transition. If you try and force yourself to transition too quickly, it can cause a lot of stress, or it does for myself. We also have aspects of the pilot's checklist on email. Generally, like what I find to be very, very helpful is if there is a very, very long email, and within the email there are a lot of different directions for all sorts of different people who would be receiving said email, to just have a bullet point, like of put simply what is wanting to be done. For some people, processing large amounts of text on a page can take a very, very long time, and it's not a very efficient way of going about it. So being able to, I think it's good practice anyway, to be able to condense what you're asking of somebody into some short bullet points. Can be very, very helpful if you give someone a task, especially if they're feeling quite stressed on the day. More time for adjusting changes, if there are any changes that are going on in the workplace at the time. Sometimes it can be quite hard for us to get in the swing of things as opposed to other people. So having some time to do so is usually quite good. Due to liking certainty and routine, can be sometimes quite stressful for us to move out of a routine and start a new one. Clear deadlines, brief and questions for clarity. So clarity is great. If there is no clarity, being open to people asking you questions on aspects of it that you didn't think were needed to be said, I think is important. It can provide us a lot of feelings of certainty to have that clarity. And encourage breaks and food if appropriate. And I'm not just saying like, as a manager, go around and like make sure that all your employees have like adequate nutrition throughout the day. I mean, like if you have a friend or someone who kind of forgets to go for breaks and food, because I'm that person, or have a drink, could be a nice thing to do if you wanted to. As I said, if appropriate, if they sort of give you the side eye and they get a bit annoyed at you for trying to like mother them in some way, then it's context dependent, basically. That's what I'm trying to say.